Ken, when you did your first baseball series in '94, we hadn't seen that awful strike that cost the World Series. We hadn't been aware of the explosion of performance-enhancing drugs. And so even though the 10th inning celebrates a lot of spectacular achievements and some great human drama, there's a darker tone to this because you do address the economic issues, you do address performance enhancing. How much has changed in your view of baseball based on all the drama of the last 16 years?
Well, it's interesting. I think it seems darker than it actually is because we all lived through it. If you look at the original 9 episodes, 9 innings, 18 and a half hour, 150-year history of baseball from the 1840s up to 1992, which is the World Series, it's dealing with all sorts of dark things, including someone in the first episode in 1858 saying, you know, they don't play baseball the way they used to. He was worried that players were being paid under the table and that this would completely destroy the game. And then by the next episode, it's gamblers and alcohol. By the next episode, it's the exclusion of African Americans, it's amphetamines, it's labor issues, it's marijuana and cocaine, it's, you know, collusion, whatever it is. Baseball's always been threatened and people are always writing its obituary. And so I think it only feels darker because it's now. Let me just say that the star of the 10th inning is the resiliency of baseball. The game is never better, it's never more popular and never more profitable. And the quality of play on the field that we're seeing today is as good, if not better, than any other time in its history. And we have a kind of, you know, I was going to say parody. It's not so much parody as it is that we've invited in everyone from the world who's interested in this game, and they've contributed magnificently. And so this episode has to detail the Latin and Asian involvement and the way in which the globalization of our world has also flown into baseball, and we're celebrating that too.
One of your contributors made I thought, a trenchant point when he said, baseball seems to be having, at the same time, a renaissance and a calamity, speaking of all the assaults to the integrity of the game based on performance-enhancing drugs. Do you believe that is true and possible?
Well, actually, that was done by Howard Bryant, who's a superb baseball writer, and he came after Bud Selig had said that this was undergoing a kind of renaissance and golden age in baseball. But it's really, and I think Howard's right to point out that if your measure is only money, as he says, yes, it is a success. But given the cloud that was hanging over that particular moment that we were describing, which was steroids, and it was when we were in the midst of the steroids thing, then that answer correct. The next comment by Tom Boswell is really the best way to understand it because he is the mitigating factor over both, which is he said that baseball fans have been able to compartmentalize, and the very fact that the baseball players have become more human because we've understood that they've got failings like us. The same as we let the same, as Boswell says, sieve of information that we would attend to our friends and our family members makes them more human and humanizes the game, and in some ways makes it more popular. So I would say that at the time that Howard was speaking about it, we didn't know. We were in the middle of a steroid scandal. But if we look back at it, we realize there weren't any more 300 hitters. Nobody hit 406 as Ted Williams did in 41. Nobody had a 56-game hitting streak. No pitcher won 30 or 35 or 40 games, which would have been the statistical equivalent of hitting 73 home runs as Barry Bonds did in 2001. That a lot of the most cherished records have stayed the same. Now, admittedly, the home run figures went up and it lengthened pitchers' careers. But we are definitely on the backside of steroid scandal. Baseball, which had the worst testing of any sport, now has the best. You catch Manny Ramirez, one of the greatest right-handed hitters in baseball history, and he loses a third of his season. You know this thing has teeth and it's really working. And a 50 home run season is now a rarity again. That's the good news. So I think that where Bryant made that comment was appropriate. But I think now we would agree that we're back into a really wonderful period in the game.
You welcome to our Safeco Field ambience, by the way.
I love it.
You made Chris Rock made a very funny comment to you. He said that if you could take a pill, meaning you, Ken Burns, filmmaker, to make Steven Spielberg money, don't you think you'd take it? And that brings up the bigger subject of baseball reflecting, as it always has throughout its history, the American culture. You know, right now we're in a belief that science will make us Superman, and we're in a performance-enhancing culture. Do you think that's why baseball hasn't suffered a more severe backlash towards
No,
that?
I actually think that there's been a disconnect. We've been shocked that our players have taken this and we're willing to dismiss them and eliminate them without understanding the complexity that we live in a pharmacologically inclined culture, that we give our kids stuff to do better in school. We take drugs to go to sleep, drugs to wake up, drugs to do better in the bedroom, and suddenly we can't see that connection. And so I think this is a complicated world and a confusing world, and we're always trying to superimpose a neat scenario. It's all so much simpler to say, you know, red state, blue state, good, bad, black, white, male, female, than it is to understand that the human condition is one of immense shades of gray, and that any time that we attempt to give a simple answer, be careful, someone's picking your pocket or picking your brain. And I think that's what happened in our steroid stuff. Of course these players are going to succumb. The whole culture supports it. And yet at the same time, without excusing them, we have to then look at this and understand that in baseball, where the records mean something, we still have to tell stories. You know, in 1919, it says the Cincinnati Red Stockings won the World Series. But anybody who knows anything about baseball knows that a gambler, Arnold Rothstein, paid the Chicago White Sox, forever known as the Black Sox, to throw that series. But there's no asterisk. It just says Cincinnati Red Stockings won, and you could pass that by in the record books, just as there's no asterisk next to Babe Ruth, who never had to bat against Satchel Paige because we excluded African Americans, or bat alongside and compete with Josh Gibson, who one year we suspect had 70 home runs when the best Babe Ruth could manage was 60, and that was a record that stood for a long time. So I think that once we're a little bit far from the steroids era, we'll be able to put it into a kind of perspective to see the choices that these players were forced desperately to make, you know, to take and keep going, or to not take and possibly fall out. And the difference between a minor league salary and a major league salary is really big.
We want to talk a little bit about a guy who's near and dear to Seattle fans' hearts, Ichiro. Bob Costas made a point about Ichiro was unlike the prevailing culture at the time of his entry into baseball in 2001.
Yeah, he says in our film, continuing the quote that you're quoting him, was that this is a bludgeon ball era, and how wonderful it is to see a throwback to the earliest days of baseball of Wee Willie Keeler, who in a few days Ichiro will break his record and have 10 consecutive seasons of more than 200 hits, and that is a record, an accomplishment that no one's done. A throwback to George Sisler, a throwback to the Negro League stars, and so we celebrate Ichiro for all these reasons. The symbolic globalization that it represents of bringing not just Japanese pitchers but Japanese position players, the extraordinary singular talent that if he came from Timbuktu, he would be one of the greatest players of all time, first ballot Hall of Famer without a doubt. And what an amazing philosophy he has, what discipline, what focus. There is this kind of Zen-like cerebral aspect to his game that is so compelling. He speaks about the game in these kind of overarching metaphors that you don't hear at the locker room when they say, you know, I'm just trying to play within myself. I just thank God for the talent I have. And you've heard that a million times, and you just say, okay, I'm not going to get anything here. Ichiro lets you in and gives you access to an unusual perspective on baseball.
How close did you get to getting him to speak in English for your film?
Well, we didn't want to. We wanted to respect his desire to speak in his native tongue, and that we could then subtitle it. As we went to the Dominican Republic and interviewed lots of young kids there with dreams and stars in their eyes of the Major League, and we recorded them in Spanish and honored them with the subtitle.
And another local hero here, Ken Griffey Jr., you juxtaposed him with Barry Bonds, and Bonds is obviously a very complicated controversial
to
figure.
say the least.
Both Jr. and Barry Bonds came from baseball playing fathers, so they have a career arc that's somewhat similar.
That's somewhat similar. Yeah, we focus on the two. Barry is one of the central biographical threads of this film, of course, because he is the one for whom the biggest target is on his back with regards to the steroids, even though thousands of his colleagues were taking two. Barry gets a lot of the blame, and only recently with Roger Clemens has that been shared a little bit in terms of the public anger and perception. But we did feel that there was a kind of antidote, this sort of sorbet course between these sometimes difficult chapters in Barry Bonds' saga, and that would be Junior. And Junior brought that gorgeous swing and that pleasure in the game and had that kind of parallel thing. He was a son of a major leaguer who seemed to love the game and was available to the press in ways that Bonds wasn't, and available to fans in the way that Bonds wasn't. And yet, you know, all in all, when you look back over the year, Barry Bonds is the greatest player we've seen in the last 20 or 30 years, despite the fact that ball and chain of steroids will be ever affixed to him.
You mentioned the complication. We live in a complicated country. Baseball can be complicated in many ways, and there was, I thought, a very poignant moment in the 10th inning where Barry Bonds, after breaking Hank Aaron's record, was at the ballpark in San Francisco when Henry Aaron's video was on the scoreboard extolling and congratulating Bonds for his achievement of breaking his record. I'm wondering what feelings and thoughts you had about that particular moment in
Well,
baseball
first of all, let me preface it as a fan who was on the road promoting another film on World War II. I was in a hotel room, and I turned on the set, and there was the game. They cut away, I guess, to it. And I watched it, and I didn't really feel anything, as Howard Bryant said. I didn't wake up my son to show him this great moment. And yet the crowd was going wild. And then that incredibly magnanimous gesture by Henry Aaron, who must have been pained by what had gone on and had already decided not to be present when his record was broken. But how generous. And I think what he said is, you know, you've got to give Barry his due. And I agree with that in some ways. Barry will forever have this asterisk, either real or imagined, next to his name in a way that Henry Aaron won't. And we'll hope that somebody will pass him. And you know, the most likely person right now is A-Rod, who doesn't, who's tainted as well. So it's a complicated dynamic, and I think what we tend to do in our media culture is say it's black and white. It's a binary response, and we're saying, wait a second, there's a more interesting story if you tolerate the complexities.
That is what this DVD covered very, very well.
Well, thank you. I think that's what we wanted to do, and we're so thrilled as we travel around the country and get the response of people that they see it, and even people who aren't baseball fans. We made it in some ways for that person, that woman who says, well, my husband will like this, he's a baseball follower. Well, actually, I say to her, we made this for you. We know your husband will come and watch it because he's a passionate fan of baseball, but this is about stories. And it doesn't matter if you tell a good story, and I think we have, and you'll be the much better judge of that. If you tell a good story about anything, people will sit up and pay attention, and I think this is a good story. Now, whether we've done a good job at telling that story remains to be seen by the response to the film, but we tried awful hard to make honor this game, which is the best game that's ever been invented.
It's a marvelous story, well told. Congratulations, and thanks for stopping by in Seattle.
Thank you. Great to see you.
My pleasure.
Take care.